On behalf of my colleague Bill Fisher and myself, we work together on the colloquia. We're pleased to welcome you to the first colloquia of the spring semester for the School of Library and Information Science at San Jose State University. We're really glad all of you could join us, and we're really glad to have as our speaker today Tom Peters, and he's going to talk about the future of reading, which is really a hot topic right now, and just a great topic to start out this series. Tom is the Associate, let's see if I can get this right, Associate Dean for Strategic Technology Initiatives at Milner Library at Illinois State University. And he has been involved with electronic books since their very beginning. I hope he'll tell you the story of his first reading experience with an electronic book, and has done all kinds of projects and written articles and spoken on this topic. So Tom, I'll turn it over to you, and we're really glad to have you today.
Thanks, Laurie. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Bill and Laurie, for inviting me to speak, and thanks for the School of Library and Information Science at San Jose State University for coordinating and offering this series. It's good to have everybody here. We have people from all over the U.S. and a few Canadians even. Always good to see some Canadians come in. Yeah, I'd like to talk to you about the future of reading, and the subtitle is Bleak or Bright. I think there are some indicators of both bleakness and brightness in the future of reading. Since Laurie mentioned, I'll tell you the story. I've been reading ebooks, not exclusively. I still read printed books as well, and I'm actually very fond of audiobook, what I call auditory reading. But the first ebook I ever read, I had stepped on a nail, and I was laid up for a day or so, and Laurie Bell just happened to send to me, this must have been 1998 or 1999, wow, 14 years ago, 13, 14 years ago. She just happened to send me a Rocket ebook that was just coming out, and she said, you ought to take a look at this. It arrived the day I stepped on this nail, so I was in bed, kind of in pain, and I read Alice in Wonderland was just preloaded on this Rocket ebook, and it was a wonderful experience, and that kind of got me interested in the whole ebook movement way back when. And who would have known that I've gotten this advanced this far in 2012. There's a lot of talk about the future of libraries, the future of publishing, the future of bookselling, the future of all different parts of the value chain in reading and writing. But I really want to concentrate today on the future of reading, the reading experience, if you will, and what librarians, I think most of us are librarians here today, and if you're not a librarian, I'm happy you're here as well, what this might mean for what we should be doing as librarians. So that's kind of what I'd like to cover for the next few minutes here. Do feel free to, if you have a question, comment, rebuttal, rejoinder, a yeah but, type it into text chat and I'll try to address it either as they come up or I'll try to move through these slides pretty quickly. So I think there is a revolution ongoing here about ebooks, e-readers, and e-reading. Whenever you see Stephen King sort of assuming the pose of either a carnival barker or a televangelist, I'm not quite sure what he looks like there. He seems to be extolling the virtues of e-reading. You know something's happening. Some sort of revolution is happening here, but we're kind of like, we need a roadmap to all the revolutions that are currently underway. There's certainly a revolution in mobile devices. It's a different topic for a different talk, but the mobile revolution, global mobile revolution, is just a huge, I think, transformative experience in the overall human endeavor. Certainly book selling may be a revolution that's going to lead to no one left bookselling books. I don't know. The future of publishing is much in doubt. The price points now for ebooks are getting quite low, and there's a downward pressure, as they say, on the wares that publishers and booksellers create. But I really want to focus on maybe the anchor stores of this wonderful mall of reading, or the actual reading experience and the experience of authorship. So first of all, some preliminary questions. Will this revolution last? I think so. I put up a couple images here of the CB radio craze of the 1970s and the pet rock craze. I don't know when that was. They were really hot when they were hot, but nobody hardly remembers these anymore. There was even a CB Illustrated magazine, and I don't know if you can see that, but Sex on CB down there in the sort of the left center area of that cover. So things don't change much over the decades. The other thing is that often we have predictions of revolutions that never happen or haven't happened yet. So in the 1970s, there was also this bold prediction that we'd have paperless offices. I'm actually not in my office right now, but if I were in my office, I would look around and I'd see a lot of paper. You know, we haven't gotten to the paperless office stage yet. In the late 90s, as I mentioned, was when this first wave of ebook readers came out. A lot of them were startup companies. It just didn't take, really, and it was, I call it the failed ebook coup. Now, it wasn't a revolution, it was a coup, and it was a failed coup. And then one of my favorite technologies in kind of a derisive way is the Segway. When it came out, it was supposed to revolutionize human transportation. Well, you see a few around, but they didn't really take off, and it's been 11 years now. So we're still waiting for the Segway to take off. One revolution I think that's happened, and it was almost irrevocable, and yet we don't talk about it much, is we transitioned in our lifetime, even if you're only 18, 20, 25 years old, it's happened in your lifetime, we transitioned from an era that went on for millennia where most of the texts that we interacted with were on what I'd call static text-bearing devices. So I've got a tombstone there and a printed book. To an era in which most of the text that we interact with are on dynamic displays, devices, such as my beloved Etch-a-Sketch, which was one of the prototypical dynamic text-bearing devices, and then I've got an image there of an augmented reality type of screen. And so both of those, you know, the wax tablet goes way back to the ancient time where you would write out your rhetoric or whatever on a wax tablet, and then your instructor would examine it, and then you would wipe it clean and write something else. So there were dynamic text-bearing devices going way back. And there are still, of course, static text-bearing devices. The printed book is not going away. It hasn't gone away yet. But the era's changed, I think. And so the dominant form of which we interact with most text these days is on dynamic devices, and primarily some sort of computing device. The other thing that I'm really intrigued with is especially as a librarian, is I think historically librarians have tended to focus on information objects. So the book there on the left-hand side, we do a lot with, you know, we catalog them, we tattle tape them, we describe them in various ways, we protect them, we replace them, we shelve them. We're very much into the information objects, but I think moving forward farther into the 21st century, it would behoove us to really try to concentrate more on the information experiences. So we have this wonderful young girl here who's reading a book, sitting in a chair, very engrossed in her reading, using the chair in a very unconventional way. I doubt the designer of that chair designed it to be used in that way, but of course she's using it that way. But she's obviously having an immersive information experience. Now definitely she's holding an information object, she's interacting with an information object, but I think we need to think in terms of the total information experience to really sort of think through what the future of reading is as we move forward. Of course, revolutions are always interesting and always unsettling, and one thing that happens when any revolution breaks out is that there is what I call the settling of old scores. And so there's this quote from one of Shakespeare's plays: "The first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers." You know, so once the revolution breaks out, then there's going to be some sort of retribution. Long scores are going to be settled. Long-held grudges are going to be avenged. I think what might be happening here, I don't know, and I don't have any publishing, I don't have any friends in high publishing places, but what I hear and read about is that a lot of publishers never really liked the library lending model. They sort of saw it as tolerable, but not really, it was sort of a drag on their business, if you will. And so I think sometimes the publishers see the ebook revolution as an opportunity to sort of right that wrong, to say, well, let's really marginalize the library lending model in the ebook era because it's not a moneymaker for us, or not a big moneymaker for us. And then you have all these tech companies that are moving into the reading space, if you will. So Apple was a holdout for a while. They were like, well, we want to get into this. When Steve Jobs was still alive, he came out with some comments and said, we're not going to get into ebooks. They've since changed their tune, or their iTunes, I guess you'd say. They've changed their iTunes. Amazon, of course, has always been into the reading space. And Google's trying to get into the reading space. So they're really big tech companies that are trying to get into the reading space. I think they're just ignoring libraries and the library lending model. I don't think they are out to get us or to do us in, but they're just really ignoring us. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So it's complicated. There's a lot going on here, a lot of revolutions, and I think there's some value in trying to discern where we're headed. Now, you know, a lot of predictions never happen, and it's always a practice fraught with danger to try to predict the future, but I think again, it behooves us to, I've used behoove twice now, it must be an official webinar. It behooves us to think about where we're headed here in terms of reading. And just to be clear, I think that libraries are really support readers. You know, a lot of libraries do a lot to help people that are looking for jobs and trying to start businesses, and a lot of different reasons why people use libraries. But I think our core clientele and the core experience that we support is reading. And it'd be a different topic for a discussion, but you know, the value of reading. I'm just going to assume that we all agree that reading is important for some reason, socially, culturally, individual enhancement, quality of life, whatever the reason is, or combination of reasons. I think that reading is important, and so the future of reading should be important to us if we believe that. Now, one idea is to follow the money. So, I don't have the figures here, but there's been a lot of money invested in e-reading systems in the last few years. I mentioned the big players now. This is not sort of garage startup companies doing this stuff. There's still a few of those out there, but these are the really big companies that are investing a lot of money in trying to transform the reading experience as we move into the digital age of e-reading. And so you could sort of adopt a strategy of following the money and seeing where the money's being spent. Let me tell you just one experience that I had. It was an eye-opener for me. So I've got a Kindle. I received a Kindle as a gift from a dear friend about a year ago, I guess it was, and I've been using it and really enjoying it. I think it's a Kindle 2, or it wasn't an original Kindle, and it's not I have a Fire, but I don't read much on my Kindle, on my Amazon Fire. So I've been reading on my Kindle, and I first noticed a book called The Sisters Brothers, which I would recommend. It's a novel by Patrick DeWitt. I first noticed this is a Man Booker Prize finalist, and I think I got an email message letting me know about that. I then read the Amazon reviews and comments. I thought about it a little bit. I noticed it was a $9.99 Kindle edition, so under $10. I thought about it for a while. I said, oh, okay, I want to read that book. I'm looking for something, you know, new author kind of thing. It was delivered to my Kindle in less than a minute. I read it in 3 days, and actually that was a deliberate slowdown. You know, sometimes when you're reading a book, you deliberately slow down. I'm really enjoying this. I'm actually going to slow down to extend the pleasurable experience. So I could have read it in one night, which is rare for me, but I actually read it over a course of 3 days. I'm a librarian. I got to tell you this. You can, revoke my ALA membership if you want to. I didn't even think about even checking whether the local public library had it. I did so afterwards when I was thinking through this. My local public library did not have it. I did find that I work at an academic library. I did find that there was one copy. It was checked out. It was overdue at my academic library. Again, I did not check that until afterwards, and I thought, I wonder if my library had a copy of that. I had a very good reading experience, very rapid. It was, but it did not involve libraries at all. Now, I think that as I think about reading, I think of reading as occurring in one of four sort of situations, what I call situational reading. And of course, there's school-related reading. So when you're in kindergarten up through postgraduate work, any kind of formal educational experience usually involves reading. So if you've got an assignment, you've got the syllabus, you're going to be doing some reading. Then you sort of transition to the world of work, and often when you're doing work in many vocations, you're also reading. So there's school-related reading, work-related reading. Then there's what I call avocational reading, which is reading for pleasure. Some people call it reading for pleasure. I just call it, I think avocational is a little bit broader. It's just like anything that's not vocationally related is avocational reading. And then the fourth one is what I call incidental reading, where you're reading something in the context of doing something else. If you're driving your car in the U.S. anyway, excuse me, you may run across a traffic sign that says through traffic, merge right. You are indeed reading, but you don't really think about I'm reading, you know. And I never think, oh, honey, I can't quite fall asleep. I'm going to drive around and read some road signs for a while. You don't do it for pleasure. It's just in the context of doing something else that you read. So I think those are the four situations in which we read. I want to focus on avocational reading. And so in any given year, only a slight majority of adult Americans claim to have read anything for pleasure that is not related to school or work. So last time the National Endowment for the Arts looked at this in late 2008, they found that only a slight majority of adult Americans engaged in literary reading in 2008. So it's not a saturated market. Let me put it that way. That's the nicest spin I can put on it. It's not a saturated reading market. There's a lot of room for growth. And one thing about e-readers is that a lot of people who are readers report that they often do a lot more reading once they get into the e-reading mode. And whether that's sustainable or not, if it's sort of the novelty factor of it, I just don't know. But there are a lot of blog posts and things that say, boy, my reading really picked up once I switched over to e-reading or sort of embraced e-reading. So who knows? Time will tell. I think we're also, when we think about reading, we need to take what I call a soup to nuts approach. We need to think about this whole process from searching, discovery, and selection to all the value extraction and additions the reader wishes to make. Yeah, and I agree with Michelle that there's a lot of, like gaming handbooks is not literary, but as avocational, right? So I think avocational kind of covers that whole broad spectrum of things that we do. And some people really get into topics. You know, there are Lincoln buffs all over the world, and you know, the type of reading they do is very intense, but it's not related to their work or to their schoolwork, and so I would still call it classified as avocational. But there's a broad spectrum there. I agree, Michelle. Now, the other thing we need to realize is that reading and reading in general is a complete thing, as Hemingway would say. It was a complete thing. You got to have content. You got to have some kind of reading device because it's electronic. You've got to have some kind of distribution system. I'll come back to that. You, of course, have to have a human e-reader, not a gadget, but a human being. And you also have some sort of, it's a process. Reading is a process with outcomes, both short-term and long-term. So, for example, there have been some studies that are showing that long-term retention of content read on a screen is not as good overall, in general, than long-term retention of content read on printed paper. If we accept those results as being truthful, and I have no reason not to do so. Again, the question is, well, it's because we, until a few years ago, we were just more accustomed to reading things on print and on screen, and therefore that's why it's a better, there's better long-term retention of the content. I don't know. Again, time will tell. Now, back in the late 90s, when the ebook revolution was just getting started, the failed coup, as I called it, I used to deride people that would talk about the sensory aspects of reading printed book. I'll try to find those, Pamela, and see. I'll try to find those, and I'll let Lori know. There are studies out there. I'm not just making them up. Reading as a sensation, I used to be derisive of it. I used to say, oh, if you talk about you like the feel of a book, of a printed book, or you like the smell of print on paper, I would say that those were just like sensational crutches that you were using. That wasn't really essential to the reading experience. I've since done a 180 on this, and I actually think that reading is, in some part, a sensory experience. And so there's visual reading, printed on paper or digital. There's auditory reading, analog and digital audiobook, prepackaged, downloadable, streaming audiobooks. Someone said before we got started that someone said that e-reading is not really reading. I've heard a lot of people say that auditory reading or listening to an audiobook is not really reading. Tell that to all my blind friends, because that's really one of the primary ways that they read books. And I think it's a great experience, but it's a different experience, a different sensory experience. Then, of course, there's tactile reading with Braille. There's both digital Braille readers and printed Braille now. And then, of course, to cover all the 5 basic senses, and there could be olfactory reading, scratch and sniff web kind of stuff. And then the one I'm really anxiously awaiting is gustatory reading, where you would actually devour a good book and ingest it with a smack of your lips. Now, in talking about the future of reading, we need to consider all the stakeholders. This is not an exhaustive list, but there are certainly the authors, the creators of the content. There's the agents, rights holders, and whatever. There are indeed still publishers. There are still distributors and aggregators. There are still booksellers. There are still librarians. And there's a whole library vendor market. And then, as I mentioned, there's all these IT companies that are kind of muscling their way into the whole stakeholder space here. And then finally, there's the readers. And so there's a lot of stakeholders in this revolution here, and you know, it's might be a struggle for control. Well, sometimes I think it's all about the struggle for control and who's going to come out on top. Are the readers going to gain more control over the reading experience? Are authors going to gain more control over the distribution and the lucrative aspects of writing and publishing? I just don't know. Again, it's wait and see. But here's a great quote from Russell Grandinetti, who's an Amazon executive from last year. He said, the only really necessary people in the publishing process now are the writer and the reader. So these are the two anchors. Everyone who stands between those two has both risk and opportunity. I actually disagree with this. The more I thought about this, there's got to be some sort of a distribution method, and whether libraries are part of that distribution method or if Amazon becomes the leading distributor, I still think you need something like an editorial aspect to it. Some people can self-edit their work very well, but frankly, my experience has been most of us don't. We need to have somebody else look at it and do some editorial work on the things that we write. So I don't agree with this, but I do think that these two stakeholders are really essential. Now, the other thing we have to consider is all of these devices that we're reading on these days, or at least some of us are reading on. I just saw that TuneIn and American Life report, I think came out last week, that after the holiday gift-giving season just ended, there was a big jump in the number of adult Americans who own either a dedicated e-reading device or a tablet computer. They didn't even cover mobile phones or anything else. It's now up to probably, as of today, it's probably up to 30% of the adult American public now have access to at least two of the major devices for reading. But there's all these devices out there: mobile phones, dedicated reading devices, all the portable music and media players can also do double duty as reading devices. The netbooks are kind of a interesting little flash in the pan. I actually have a netbook that I really like, but I don't really read on it too much. Then there are all the tablet devices. There's a whole lot of reading going on iPads, for example. Even portable gaming devices can be used as e-readers in a pinch, and then there's all this wonderful stuff for devices for kids. So what we need to realize as librarians is that the readers are being left to their own devices. We have very little or no organizational control over what devices they're going to bring into our library and say, I just got this as a gift, or I just bought this device, and now I want to read on it. I want to read your ebooks on it. How do I do that? There's going to be no dominant device that I can see on the horizon. There's going to be no black rotary phone. We're all going to have the same iPad 3 or whatever. I just don't see that happening anytime soon. And these devices are designed for individualization. They are very much personal, portable information communication and entertainment appliances. So all of these things that you can do on these devices, you can have. On these devices, you can do all kinds of information experiences: reading, viewing, listening. You can be entertained in various ways. You can communicate in various ways, and you can create content through your embedded camera, your video camera, and all of these activities exist, what I like to call cheek by jowl, on the same device. So not only is reading and e-reading having its own sort of internal struggle, but we're also looking at devices where you can do all kinds of things. And so you can say, oh, I want to be reading, or do I want to watch a movie, or do I want to check Facebook, or do I want to tweet, or what do I want to do? So that's another situation. So what's going to happen here? Again, I'm just gazing into a crystal ball that might be murky, but I think we're going to see more what I would call worthwhile integration of media into the reading experience, whether it's embedded videos and other kinds of multimedia kind of experiences into the actual reading. We're starting to see some of that with like cookbooks and exercise videos as they go digital. So I think we're kind of into that phase where first we did the transition kind of thing, where it's just like take the printed book and make it electronic. And now, collectively, we're kind of looking at, well, what can we do with this now to really enhance that reading experience? We're starting to see different genres. So, again, short-form nonfiction, about 100 pages seems to be quite popular. We're seeing a revival of sort of the novella, if you will, longish short story kind of things. And, of course, the cell phone novel is very popular in Japan and some of the Pacific Rim countries. And there have been sort of dire predictions of a decline in sustained reading and sustained argument. The Nicholas Carr's The Shallows, that book, which was a good read, by the way, and I read it cover to cover. Basic argument is that we're through our browsing habits online, we're actually having an intentional problem. The big one I find very interesting, and I'm just not sure what to make of this, is if e-reading will become more communal. So that, again, my ideal of reading is to be by myself in a quiet place, happily reading by myself. But there's all kinds of experiments going on there now that make the actual act of reading more communal. One example I'll give you is the Kobo Pulse, and there's a link to a Mashable write-up about it, where you can actually download a little application that will tell you what kind of comments are going on by people who are reading a page of a book, at the same time that you're reading that book. And I think Kobo Pulse, or Kobo has about 5 million people have downloaded their app. So of those 5 million, you can see who's reading this book with me right now at the same time, and you can share comments back and forth. That's what I mean by communal reading. It used to be you would read the book and then go to the book discussion group. Now it's like those two things have become mashed up. So it's read and understand what other people are thinking about it at pretty much the same time. I don't know what's going to happen with that. So what should we do? What should librarians do? Given all this turmoil in the whole reading space, what should we do? I can tell you, I love things that produce immediate discernible results. I love to paint, I love to mow the lawn, I love to shovel snow, because you can turn around and say, I just did that. That's what I did. That's what I accomplished. I think in this space, we can't sort of do that. We can't, go storm the major publishers, and we have to undertake what I call murky work to really position libraries for continued success in what I think is the dawning e-reading era. Now, we've already sort of tilted at some windmills. I was actually part of a process a few years ago where the state library directors, the directors of state libraries, were seriously considering, and I actually agreed with them at the time, that maybe we ought to design a library reading appliance, sort of library branded, designed for what we think library readers really want. It'd be sort of like a stripped down version, not a lot of bells and whistles. We pretty much quickly abandoned that because the development, the rapidity with which e-readers are developing, I don't think the library industry can keep up with that. I mean, you really have to invest a lot, and I'm sure Apple is thinking about the iPad 5. They're not actually actively working on it, and so it's just going to be. I don't think that's a good thing for us to do. We can also sort of tilt at some of the big issues I think that are out there, like copyright, intellectual property rights. I think we should be trying to somehow, I think, the whole notion of intellectual property rights is going to see some fundamental change. I don't know what's going to happen. We could go back to sort of pre-industrial sense of you could borrow and actually borrow content and reuse it in some way is actually a form of flattery, if you will. Or I don't know what's going to happen there, but I think something fundamental is going to happen there. Where should we focus our attention? We have limited resources, only so many hours in a day, only so many dollars available for doing things. What should we focus on? The way I sort of boil it down is we could focus on content. A lot of libraries don't offer anywhere near as many ebooks as a lot of these online sites do, these commercial sites. You pretty much have to have 1 million titles to really be in the big leagues these days. And Brewster Kahle from the Internet Archive thinks that the bar is going to be raised to 10 million pretty quickly. If you don't have 10 million titles available, ebook titles, you're not going to be able to kind of attract the kind of clientele that is really going to be looking for this stuff. So you got to focus on content. We could focus on the devices. There are so many out there. I hear from a lot of librarians, it's just they can't keep up. Everybody's bringing all these different devices. They want to use our content on these devices, but how am I as a public service librarian supposed to know how to use all these different operating systems, all these different devices? It's just almost an impossible task. We also could focus on what I call our core fulfillment services. We might call it circulation in librarianship, but it's really fulfillment in a more general sense, so that once somebody wants to buy something or borrow something, in the case of a library, how quickly, how easily do we get that digital object into their hands, onto their device, and so they're having some sort of a reading experience. And then actually, the more I think about it, in the last month or so, I've been thinking that this is actually the one that might bite us, that might really, I think that what's happening is that a lot of these ebook companies the real struggle is to make the fulfillment service process as quick and as streamlined as possible. And it may happen quickly that library users are going to look at, why can't the libraries make their fulfillment services just as good as Amazon and Apple and Kobo and Google do? Or we could focus on what I call value-adding services, like the online book discussion groups and tagging opportunities and the metadata that we add to things and all the other types of value-adding services that we add to the reading experience. So let me just dwell on these for a minute. So one question I have is, what should be our relationship with the devices? If e-reading on portable devices becomes the dominant way to read, and I think it is, it's quickly becoming that, should we lend these? It really depends on your library clientele. We've been in the device business for our entire history. So printed books, books on vellum, periodicals, microfilm, CDs, DVDs, Blu-ray discs, there's all these different media, but it's all basically the same thing. We supply the device, whether it's a printed book or whatever it is, that conveys the text to the user. But now we're facing situations, do we need to do that anymore? Could we get out of the device business? Could we get out of the container business? And can we concentrate on content and information services? It's a very interesting question. But we still have, people that for whatever reason, they lack the money, they lack the knowledge, or they lack the patience to own and operate their own personal portable e-reading devices. So they may be looking to the library to supply those devices. Again, it depends on your library. But I do think that the device business in librarianship, the handling of devices, is going to become a pretty marginal service. We're going to have those things, but it's not going to be our core service moving forward. And what many libraries are realizing is that if we do get into the device lending business, we have to overcome that intensely personal relationship that people have with their portable devices. We all know, the iPhones and the Droid phones and the Kindle lovers and the iPad lovers, and they really love their devices. And if you check out one from a library, it's not the same experience. I've tried it; it's just not the same. And so that's something we have to overcome, that personal part of the personal portable information, communication, and entertainment devices. Now, the other thing about e-collections is the content. So does size matter? Yes, I think it does. I think that rapid fulfillment is another important thing for us. The thing that we really have is price, because there's no out-of-pocket expense for most library content and services, and so that's a really good value proposition. The whole browsability of these collections is something, I'll come back to that in a minute. The compatibility with all the plethora of devices, so you want to have something that's available on a lot of devices. I'm just not sure what value quality is going to have. I'm an old enough person that I think the quality still matters, but some of my younger colleagues say, nah, good enough is good enough, and quality isn't what it used to be. The value of quality isn't what it used to be. So I'll throw that out there and we can talk about it. Maybe we'll get into sort of local or niche interest collections, so that each library will really kind of focus on what they think is a core area, collection area. And last but not least, I think some of it is just habit forming. I tend to be more of an Amazon ebook reader than a Google book reader, and it's just because I got started using Amazon more before I used Google. And habit, don't discount the importance of habit. Same thing with Google and Bing. I tend to search Google if I just need to do a search, but I sort of read stuff and I say, oh, Bing's kind of catching up. It's better in some areas, but it's just a habit with me, I guess, and with a lot of people probably. Once they form that habit, brand habit forming, I guess. Okay, so let's talk about publishing for just a minute. There are 6 big trade publishers, and there they are listed there. Some of them will not sell ebooks to libraries. Milner and Simon Schuster have, I think, always refused to do it. HarperCollins has what I call the 26 bottles of beer on the wall. 26 bottles of beer. That once you run out of those 26 bottles of beer, then you got to go to the convenience store, get some more beer, buy another version of the ebook from HarperCollins, and you can start singing 26 bottles of beer again. Or should some of the publishers will actually negotiate ebooks to libraries. I think Penguin, though, has been kind of rethinking all of that recently. Are ebooks disruptive to the Big Six? Yes, they are. A blog that I'd really recommend is Mike Shatskin's blog. It's called the idealog.com. He's a publishing industry insider, but he is someone who I can understand in the publishing industry, who seems to speak truthfully. I don't always agree with him, but he seems to speak in a straightforward, understandable way. He claims that currently about 20% of the revenue from the Big Six publishers is through ebooks, about 25% of their sales, and he thinks that it may reach 80% in the next 3 years. So it is very disruptive to the Big Six. But I'm wondering now, are the Big Six like the CBS, NBC, and PBS and ABC were back in about 1975. They had most of the market, but they didn't see cable coming along, and their market share has been pretty much steadily declining ever since. I think that the Big Six are at the zenith of their power in the marketplace, and I actually think that what we're going to see moving forward is the distributors are really going to be the ones that are gaining some clout, if you will. So I think we're down to, here in the U.S., I think we're down to a 4-horse race. The Amazon Kindle / Fire, the iPad, iPhone from Apple, the Barnes & Noble Nook, and the dark horse here is Google Books. I think they might have entered a little bit too late into this race, and they're playing catch-up. That's where I really see the interesting things happening. And I would just say that these companies, if they do become major players in the e-reading overall experience and business, if you will, they may not behave like the Big Six publishers at all. So we shouldn't assume that it's going to be just, the Big Six are now these other different 4. It may be a totally different ball game. They want to play cricket or something, I don't know. Australian football, who knows? So if this is true, if portable e-reading for pleasure becomes what I call an unbundled commercial enterprise serving individual readers, so let me go back here and just comment that I think every one of these Big 4 here are primarily, if not exclusively, courting individual readers. They don't care about institutional sales at this point. Barnes & Noble is the only one that seems to be willing to work with libraries in a meaningful way. The rest are like, no, we sell to individuals. Why would we bother dealing with libraries and other institutional sales? That's just not where their business models are at present. That may change, but at present, they're not really interested in institutional sales to libraries or anybody else. If this happens, where we see this as a commercial enterprise serving individual readers, who are the at-risk groups here? Well, bookstores, definitely. I'm not sure. I just don't know. There are some bricks-and-mortar bookstores that will always survive because of their local demographics and the way they've, sort of bundled their services and ambiance and who knows what. But overall, I wouldn't advise anybody getting into the bookstore business right now. Libraries are definitely at risk. The others are the have-nots. And also people who need to have access to a lot of text, like students and scholars and researchers. They can't afford to pay $9.99 for every book that they want to examine. They need to have some sort of public access to these things. And, of course, voracious readers, people that go through a book a night, pretty much night after night, they need access to this kind of stuff. Now, we've been talking about this now for years. We've known this is going to happen. That initial failed ebook coup, we should have said, yeah, it sort of was a bust, but it'll be back. They'll regroup, and it's going to happen eventually, and now it's happening. And we're now seeing the uptake of e-reading in the U.S. is actually faster than most people expected and predicted. I think the device and distribution markets are solidifying quickly. I wouldn't advise anybody even try to get into it. You're taking a huge investment, and I think that Google was actually late to the game on this one. I think that e-reader behavior and preferences are changing rapidly. I think most readers who are now have sort of more or less embraced e-reading are still kind of sort of sorting through it and finding what they like and don't like. I thought I would like reading on a Kindle, but I actually don't. I still prefer my Kindle Fire, but I actually prefer my Kindle regular Kindle. And definitely smartphones and tablets currently rule in terms of portable reading. So what should we do? What should librarians do? I think we need to assert the value of public good information institutions. And it's a tough row to hoe, but we need to help the American public, everybody from our legislators down to Joe Sixpack, to have a serious conversation about what is the value of public good institutions, information institutions, moving forward. I think that this is an issue that's time has come. I think we need to develop publisher re-education camps in inhospitable areas of the globe to help re-educate them about how libraries add to a healthy culture of reading. I think that sometimes publishers are looking at the transaction and saying, well, if I sell a book for $20 to an individual and I sell a book for $20 to a library and it gets circulated 20 times, that's not a very good value proposition for me. I think they're kind of too granular, highly granular in that sense. And then they realize that libraries support a culture of reading. And as I told you and demonstrated to you, the culture of reading is not sort of cemented into American culture. I think that there's a lot of growth there. Let me pause and address this. Mary Carroll asks, Tom, what are your thoughts on library systems like Queens, New York, and Douglas County, Colorado, who are negotiating directly with ebook publishers and developing their own platforms to manage digital rights for ebooks themselves, rather than going with Overdrive, Ingram, EBL, and so? Yeah, I just think that I know like ALA is going to be having a kind of a summit with the publishers. I really think that we ought to be having our summit with Amazon and Apple and Google, because I think they're going to be the ones that are really can control this. I think it's a great thing. I'm just not sure. The way I phrase it, Mary Carol, the way I think about it is, if you look at the what's called the independent publishing route, where people are just saying, I'm going to just do it myself. I'm not going to go through a publisher. I'm just going to self-publish. Amanda Hocking is kind of like the poster child for self-publishing. She's made millions of dollars doing it. She since has signed on with a more traditional publisher. The way I phrase it is, if you think about the whole the reading ecosystem, if you will, from the author or content creator, whatever you want to call that person that creates the content, all the way to the end user or reader, whatever you call that person at the other end, could we have a developing reading ecosystem that has no major players? It's all just sort of diffuse and almost like a cottage industry throughout. I don't know, but I would guess probably not, that somehow there's going to be some kind of major player at some stage of that whole process, from content creation to content ingestion, if you will. But again, who knows? It'll be interesting to see. But I'm just not sure that even actually Overdrive, I'm not sure about library vendors in this whole distribution space as well, and how viable they are. If they're going to be sort of squeezed out by the major non-library vendors, if they'll sort of wake up and say, well, there's a little bit of a market here, we can sort of add to our market by serving libraries and library users, and they would just sort of drive the Overdrives and the Ingrams out of business, basically. I don't know. See what happens. I do think we need to strengthen our alliances with readers and authors, and I do think we need to develop a new lending model for the e-reading era. I think our lending model, one book, one user at a time, is not the way to go. I'm not sure what is the way, but I'm pretty sure that's not it. And I'll talk about that in just a second. And I'll try to wrap up here so we can have some time for more lengthy discussion. Specifically, I think that libraries need to become actively engaged in market development. We just can't sit by and sort of bemoan and wring our hands. And we do need to continue to experiment with all the devices and services. We have to immerse ourselves in e-reading. We just sort of can't turn a blind eye to it. We really have to, experiential learning in this context is really essential, I think. Collectively, what should we do? For several years, I thought that maybe we should develop an e-reader Bill of Rights, and I know several people sort of came out with some various versions of this kind of thing. I'm not so sure anymore what an e-reader Bill of Rights, what impact that would have on this. I'm asking more, I don't know why this is, but I'm more thinking that what we really need to be working on is federal legislation to protect and promote the library lending model for digital content. The thing I really worry about is that if this kind of commercialized, direct-to-end user e-reading experience, which is wonderful. I really like Amazon. It's a good service. But if that became the only way, or the predominantly the dominant way that most people obtain their reading materials. And if we didn't have libraries, what impact would that have on the overall, stability and justice within our nation? I really see some problems there. And I was actually toying the idea earlier today that, we worry about income distribution, wealth distribution in the U.S., and everything I read is that it's actually the most polarized that it's ever been in our history, that there's more wealth concentrated in a small number of people in the U.S. than at any other time in our history. What about information? What happens if information is polarized and highly concentrated within certain small segments of our population? That actually could be more disastrous, I would suggest, than wealth concentration. The concentration of information within certain segments of our population could be disastrous for our country, I think. The other thing about acting is, what level should you act? Should you do it as an individual librarian, as individual libraries, regional, statewide, national? One thing I'll point out is that bullet there, the DPLA, the Digital Public Library of America, very interesting project. Maybe unsettling for some people. I'm going to go to PLA in Philadelphia in mid-March, and one of the sessions I'm definitely going to attend is there's a DPLA session at PLA in Philly in March. Try to learn more about what they're doing. Probably all of the above we should be. Don't let the Russian doll question dissuade you from acting. Do something probably at all levels. Let me just mention something. I'm very interested in browsing as a form of interacting with text. And I think that most people think of browsing as shelf browsing of printed books on a shelf in a library or bookstore. I think we're going to see in the next few years some online browsing experiences that are going to deep six the whole idea that shelf browsing is somehow the Platonic ideal. Two things I'd point to. The Hunt Library at North Carolina State University is going to open a year from now. They're going to have a virtual browsing aspect to their core collection, and I've given a link to a YouTube video if you want to go watch that. I also have coined this phrase called skimmy dipping, where you are browsing quickly over the surface of, skimming as it is, of a large number of text, and then you dip down into a full text kind of thing, or an article or a book, and then you come back up to the surface, if you will, and skim across. So skimmy dipping, rapid skimmy dipping. I know there was some work done at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Graduate School of Library Information Science, that looked at this phenomenon among, I think it was mainly people in the sciences and the health sciences, and who are rapidly trying to keep up with information in their fields, and they do a lot of what I call skimmy dipping. Also look at what Google Labs did with their bookcase experience. You have to use Chrome to get this experience, but they've had like this virtual gyre of endless gyre of bookshelves with the fronts all out, and you can quickly move through those, and it's a kind of an interesting take of online shelf browsing. So I think we're going to see all those kind of things. And then I'd also recommend, I haven't actually had a test experience yet because they don't have an Android app, it's just an iPhone app, but Biblion from the New York Public Library. And actually, Deanna Lee's going to be a speaker in this series coming up this spring, so I'll be interested to hear that. It's a very, very interesting way of enabling a different kind of interaction with content. It's almost like a new version of hypertext, I would call it, hyper-reading. So I think we need to move beyond fear and loathing. We have to be mindful of all stakeholders, but I think we need to align ourselves with, February 9th. So that's good. A very interesting project. I think we need to actually really be strategic about how we affirm our core values, and I really think that despite what all the OCLC studies say, the printed book is not one of our core values, and I think we need to seize all the opportunities we can to serve our communities of readers. Legislative route, there's the California Reader Privacy Act that was just enacted late last year. So we may see some more legislation. Of course, litigation is another opportunity for us. We could actually sue the publishers for not selling to us, I suppose. I don't know. I don't know whether that kind of suit would have merit. Authors Guild seems to like the litigation route. They've sued just about everybody that they don't like their business models, and I don't know what's happened with the Hatay Trust. They're sued against Hatay Trust for making those e-texts available. But I'm not a technological determinist. I think that culture and society trump technology and economics. So although technology is more than just a tool, some people use that phrase, oh, it's just a tool, it's more than that. But I think that really the cultural and social values are what we need to defend, not the technology and the economics of it. That's sort of what we have to do to make it happen. But libraries are cultural and social institutions. We're not technology companies, and we're not out to make a buck. And the other thing to note, of course, is that when technology succeeds, it recedes. It becomes ubiquitous and taken for granted, and people just don't think about it much. So we sort of have to get this, we have to get libraries better positioned in the e-reading era before we all just sort of say, well, that's the way it is. You know, it's just the way it is. So, lest we and they forget, most libraries are public goods, social and cultural institutions. We serve readers, we serve have-nots, we serve what I call will-nots. Those are people that just balk at the idea of spending $14.95 for an e-text. They just refuse to do it. And basically, we serve everyone who wants to use the library. Most libraries will serve anyone. The other thing we need to remember and remind everybody of is that digital content has the pure potential to become an absolutely non-rivalous public good. What does that mean? Air is an example. In most situations, you know, air is a non-rivalous public good. I can breathe, you can breathe, we all can breathe. Unless we're stuck in a mine shaft, there's plenty of air out there. Same thing with digital content. The thing about digital content is we can have an unlimited number of perfect copies available to everyone, anytime, anywhere. That's where the world we're headed towards. But there's all kinds of legal, social, economic governors on that we've implemented. But if you just think about the pure potential of digital content, we could blanket the globe with digital text, and everybody could be grabbing everything if they wanted to, if we could just work out the way to make that happen. And the other thing is that one person's use of digital content does not preclude others from accessing that content. In theory, that's the promise, the real affordance of digital content, and we put all these, I would say, almost artificial governors on that potential of e-content. So, in conclusion, I think that I hope, this is not a prediction, but a wish, I hope that the future of e-reading is muscular and vibrant, that many things happen, many types of new genres and ways of reading and interacting with content develop out of this series of revolutions we're currently in. I certainly hope that e-reading is not considered to be precious and tenuous and tentative and, oh, they're reading, let's kind of tiptoe around them. Oh, isn't that precious? Little Johnny and little Janie are reading. And no, it should be very muscular and vibrant. And I often think of this wonderful quote from Randall Jarrell, a poet and an essayist, from a series of essays, A Sad Heart at the Supermarket from 1962. He said, read at whim, read at whim. Don't think about it as being something that you have to be very tentative about. Just read at whim. I love that quote. So thanks very much for your time and attention. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for coming. And on behalf of Bill Fisher and myself and the School of Library and Information Science at San Jose State University, thank you all for coming. And Tom, thank you for an excellent presentation. And also thanks to Randy Chang, who does an excellent job of technical support.